Good morning. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all into this session of our 12th International Conference for Teachers of English Language Teaching during COVID-19. Today, I have the honor to introduce Dr. Joann Jodi Crandall, who is Professor Emerita of Education, former co-director of the MA TESOL program and director of the Language, Literacy and Culture PhD program at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, a former president of TESOL International, the Washington, D.C. TESOL affiliate, and the American Association for Applied Linguistics. Dr. Crandall is frequently invited to speak at national and international conferences. She has worked in all areas of English language teaching, including curriculum and materials development, assessment, standards development, and teacher training, and has provided professional development in more than 60 countries. She is the author of more than 140 publications in English language teaching, including her recent work as a series editor of National Geographic Learning's Young Learner programs, Welcome to Our World, and Explore Our World, as well as the teen program Impact, and co-author of Teaching Young Learners English.
I'm Jodi Crandall, and I'm really pleased to be able to be with you today to talk about some ways that we can motivate our young learners to read and write. By young learners, I'm referring to children in the primary grades. Usually they're ages 6 to about 12. And that will be our major focus on the kinds of activities that you can use with these young learners at various levels of their English proficiency and also their ability to read and write. But many of the activities, I think you'll find you'll be able to use with older learners as well, especially with teenagers and in some cases from adults. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to begin this webinar by asking you two questions. The first is the following. When you're teaching young learners, which are easier for you to teach? Is it the oral language skills of listening and speaking, or is it the written language skills of reading and writing? If we were doing this in person, I would be asking you to actually type in the chat room so that we could in fact interact and see what kinds of commonalities there are among our comments. But unfortunately, I was not able to be with you live, and so we have pre-recorded the talk. But I do want to know your thoughts. And at the end of the presentation, I'm going to give you my email address, or you can also call me on WhatsApp. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, or if you've got any suggestions or questions, or you've tried any of the activities, I'd love to hear about them. So that's the first question. I think probably you said that teaching reading and writing is more difficult than teaching listening and speaking. At least I would not be surprised that's the case. Remember that we learn to listen and speak before we learn to read and write. And also, even if children are literate in their own language, they still have to learn written English language conventions. But now I have a second question. Which is easier to teach to young learners? Is it reading or writing? If you said that teaching writing is more difficult, I think many of us would agree. I often find that writing is the neglected skill for English teachers at all levels, not just teaching children, but teaching teenagers, teaching adults, even sometimes teaching university students. There are lots of reasons. Here are some of the reasons that teachers have told me. The first is, I don't have enough time. And I understand that. Often writing is the last activity in a lesson, and we have a way generally of having our lessons take longer than we thought they were going to take. And so we just simply don't do writing. It may be that the classes are too large, that you have a lot of young learners, and you don't know how you're going to be able to provide any kind of feedback for all of them. And we're going to talk about some ways of doing that. Sometimes we wonder what kind of writing can we do with beginners, and I'm going to show you there's a lot of things that we can do. We're going to start with actually just learning the relationship between sounds and letters. And the fourth one, a lot of us worry about this. I'm not a good writer in English, so how can I teach writing? I think we tend to minimize our own abilities, and actually we can learn also from our children, from our young learners. In my experience, all the years that I have taught teachers, I've often said that if I haven't learned something by the end of our class, then it hasn't been a success, because we want to communicate, we want to learn from each other. And one of the things that writing does is it gives you a chance to get to know your learners and also for them to get to know you. So reading and writing, we often think of them as separate skills, but really they're part of a cycle. So when we read, we're often preparing for writing or speaking. And when we write, we're producing something that's to be read, maybe to be read aloud by us, maybe to be read by somebody else. And when we're reading for especially information, we often take notes and we write so that we remember, because we can't remember everything orally. And when we reread our notes, we often use those as we write. And so again, it's a cycle of reading for writing or writing for reading. But why are reading and writing important? They're very important, and we must include them in our classes for young learners. To begin with, they reinforce what we learn orally. It's been said that you have to repeat something 5 to 7 times to be able to remember it. So being able to listen to it, talk about it, read and write it gives us at least 4 chances. Reading also expands the input. We learn a lot of things when we read that we haven't been able to do when we listen or talk. And writing helps to remember what we've read. Shirley Bryce Heath, the famous linguist and language teacher, calls writing external memory. It's a very nice word for it, because you don't have to remember everything if you've actually written it down, because you can then refer to it. Reading helps us learn writing conventions like capitalization, punctuation, paragraphing, and writing lets us practice these. And reading and writing help link the classroom with home. Children can do homework that requires reading or writing because they have the time. And now in the pandemic, when you actually have children doing work at home before they come together in a synchronous class, this is a perfect time to be assigning some reading and or writing preparation. And they can actually be doing writing over the course of several days while they're at home. Writing provides a source of self-expression, and when others read it, a sense of pride. And I do want you to think about your young learners as authors. They love to talk about themselves. They love to express things, and they want you to notice it and to tell them how proud you are of how creative they have been. So it's important to remember that learning to read in our first language is much more difficult than learning to read in a second. We only have to become literate once. And young learners who are still learning to read and write in their first language, but once they have learned to read and write in their own language and their English level is sufficient, all of the skills will transfer to English. That doesn't mean we should postpone introducing reading and writing in our classes, because there are so many good activities that are fun for beginning readers and writers. So our goal then is to plant the seeds for reading and writing and watch them grow, helping our learners to become plants and maybe over time, eventually, full trees. So here are some beginning reading and writing activities, recognizing sound-letter relationships. The first is a picture or word sort. And here you can do this very easily online, where you put up words in different parts of a whiteboard, and they have to then find the words that begin with the same letter or that rhyme. So book, ball, and boy for the same letter, or cat, hat, and rat for rhyme. And if you know the famous story, the Dr. Seuss story about the cat and the hat, which by the way is available online with YouTube. In fact, all the stories that I'm going to mention are available free online, and they have the actual text as well as somebody who is very good reading it. In some cases, it's the author. In other cases, it's a famous person. So if you want to connect writing to that, you could ask them to draw a picture of that boy with a book and a ball and label it. Or you could ask them to actually write a sentence with the 3 words of the cat, hat, and rat. Another activity that, again, in this case, is the opposite of the picture or word sort. In this case, children are sorting words either with or without pictures, but this time they're finding the word that doesn't belong. So instead of beginning with the B, it might be a word such as dog, and that is neither part of beginning with the B, nor does it rhyme with cat, hat, and rat. And the third, you would have to do a little differently online, but it put a label of a letter on a bag, and children get to actually put pictures of words that begin with that letter into the bag. So it's not, they don't have the word, they have the picture, but they have to recognize that that picture of a book begins with a B, and it would go into the paper bag that has a letter of a B. Again, it would just simply align, you would have them actually do a kind of matching. And here are some two activities that you're probably not going to be able to do if you're teaching virtually, but I want you to know about them because they're such fun. The first is to write a letter on a partner's back, and a child puts a letter like a C on the back of another child, and the child has to guess what letter that child has made, and maybe the child can give some words that have that letter in it to begin with that letter, but it's a fun way of doing some practice. Another one that I love is called body spelling. And you can see here, we've spelled out the date 2009 and the word friends. I've done this with teenagers who love this, and I've done it with younger learners as well. They could actually spell out the name of a character or an important word in a title. Or if they're learning about animals, the name of an animal. If they're learning about food, it could be food. But the idea is to connect the spelling with something that they are currently reading. Names are a really good place to begin a focus on writing. Everyone wants you to know their name, and you need to remember their names as well. So one of the first writing activities, and it could just be copying, because they could also have the letters on the board, you could actually provide them with even name tags that have hello, my name is already written, and then they just have to put in their own name. And then you ask them to wear those, or if it's on a piece of cardboard, to put it in front of them when they're actually in class. This gives them a chance to introduce themselves, and it gives you a chance to learn their names. If over time, you may want to actually have these be more of a large piece of paper that's folded in threes so that it stands up, and they can add information as they go through various units. What is a favorite food? What is their favorite sport? What do they have a pet? What's the pet's name? All sorts of things. The idea is they almost are providing you with a bit of an autobiography. If you're meeting a class face-to-face, you could ask them to turn in their name cards at the end as an exit activity, and gives you a chance to once again match the name with the person. So you can say, oh, Marta, thank you, see you next time. Oh, Carlos, see you next class. Other kinds of name activities, well, first we want to think about what are some nice what are some nice adjectives that we can use to describe people? Here is a name acrostic, and we've had two children, one whose name is Jaime and one whose name is Sophia, and they've been looking for words that describe them, that they're proud of. These are positive descriptive adjectives, and there are lots of lists of those on the internet. I've given you one source here. It's called enchantedlearning.com, but you can just write in adjectives for people, and a lot of lists will come up. So you can go over a number of words. They can tell you words that they know, and then they can actually create their acrostic. So Jaime is joyful, athletic, intelligent, marvelous, and energetic. And Sophia is smart, outgoing, fabulous, interesting, and amazing. If we had time, I would be asking you to actually create your own name acrostic, or maybe to have you work in pairs and see if you could create a name acrostic for your partner. You could do this online when the children get so they know each other a little bit better. Now, we can't very well ask our young learners to describe themselves or their friends or their members of their family using negative adjectives. So we have to figure out other ways. If they've been reading a story about a wicked witch, it would be very easy for them to do an acrostic about a witch who is wicked and icky, terrible, cruel, horrible. Or if they've been reading about a monster or an ogre, they could do mean, old, nasty, scary, terrible, evil, rotten. And that's what the monster is about. They could even draw the monster and then use some of these words to actually describe it. So there are lots of additional activities depending upon the level of your learner. And here is an acrostic that's being used in a greeting card, a Valentine's Day card for Sarah that her friend wrote for her. So happy Valentine's Day, Sarah. You are super, awesome, real friend, always funny and happy. And note, you don't have to just use one word. You can use 2 or 3 words to describe. And so after they've tried it with one word, you can ask them to do it with a little bit more. And we're going to see you can even do an acrostic with full sentences. And here's one about my dog, whose name is Justice. And so these are very simple sentences. My dog's name is Justice. He has a black nose. He's 4 years old, and he's a big dog. And notice that I've been able to create my name in red by the way in which I put these sentences out beside each other. So you can do a lot more with these acrostics and give them a chance to play around with language in very fun ways. Another kind of activity, it's a little more complex, but could be done certainly by level 3, is an I am poem. And you would want to begin with just a small version of this. I am, using their first name, and then maybe 3 adjectives that describe me if they've already done acrostics, or maybe just I love or I like. And then maybe the next time I am, I like, I don't like, and then their last name. And over time, you could just keep adding to it. It almost becomes part of an autobiography. And the more that you do these, the more that they do them, the more that you learn about them. And actually, I would always do my own first, because our learners want to talk about themselves, but they also want to learn about me. They want to know lots about me, about their teacher. And so I would generally, in almost any writing activity, I would do a model for them so that they can see what it might look like, and at the same time, get to know you a little better. So here's one about me. I'm Jodi. I'm energetic, helpful, friendly. I love cats and dogs. I don't like elevators. I'm afraid of heights, but I hope for peace. Crandall. So again, there are lots of ways you could add to this. You can start much smaller, but it's a chance for our young learners to describe themselves and talk about who they are and share that with each other and with you. Another type of simple writing assignment is just simple 3-line poems. Here we've got a noun, a verb, and an adverb with cats meow softly. Cats meow softly. And actually in the background, I hope you aren't hearing this, but one of my cats is meowing. And children shout loudly. But we could do all sorts of things. And in fact, I want to call to your attention a wonderful book, again, available online, being read by many different people, and all the text is there. It's called The Great Kapok Tree. And it's all about a man who is going into a forest, and he's about to cut down this beautiful kapok tree. And all of the animals who rely upon that tree, one by one, try to talk him out of it. And so we have, for example, a bee who buzzes and talks about how important the flowers are. And we have a snake who hisses and talks about why it's so important to him. So it's, again, you could use these almost like 3-line poems with the characters that are in that story. And also each one of those animals moves differently. So we have a snake who slithers, and we have a bee who flies, and so forth. So you can do a lot of 3-line poems. So I do definitely want you to think about taking a look at The Great Kapok, K-A-P-O-K tree. Shape poems are really fun. Kids love these. They get to draw something, or they find something, a visual, and then they write the words within and all around it. And so maybe they've had a unit on play on swings and seesaws and slides and playgrounds. And so they first draw or find a drawing of this, in this case, a slide. And note that they then very slowly put first and all the dots I, then climb up slowly. But when they get to the top, it's quite different. And then I slide down fast. And so there's a chance of a visual and of language and actually action all coming together in this shape poem. Let me show you another shape poem. This is by Maheen, and she has drawn the picture of a dog bone. It might even be a dog cookie bone. And she's written all around the edges, puppies, puppies, bone, bone, puppies, puppies, bone, bone, and so forth. But look what she's done in the middle. She said, puppies are great fun to play with. Puppies jump around and run. Puppies bark and never stop. Puppies love to have great fun. And this is by Maheen. And you can tell not only has she written sentences, but they actually rhyme. And she's so proud of it that she signs it twice. She first signs it by Maheen, but she also has her name in the lower left corner. So you can help your young learners to actually create some of these. Maybe with this one, you might just ask them to add a sentence. What's one other sentence about puppies? Or what do puppies do? What do they like? Or maybe to change this to cats and maybe have a ball that a cat is playing with. Or, again, this is the possibilities are endless. We saw a slide. They could do a swing. They could do a seesaw. Again, it's the idea that the visual and the language reinforce one another. Here's another interesting activity. In this case, they're actually creating or filling out a party invitation. And I imagine that in different times you would have an event at least once a year in which parents come to school and that maybe they actually interact with the teacher and maybe even the children perform. So you might then want all the children to send an invitation home for, in this case, what is the party? And they only have to provide little information. In fact, they may just have to copy what you provide, the date, the time, the place. And then at the bottom, that RSVP is French for please respond. Please let us know. Répondez s'il vous plaît. But so that we know how many people are going to come. But see, here's again another kind of activity. They don't have to write full sentences, but they are able to place important information and write it is important information to know dates and time and place. So there's lots of other writing activities. We're not going to have time for lots of them, but children can underline or complete or copy words from a story or a song. For example, I love to have us listen to and sing a song many times, and then eventually don't give them the lyrics or give them just part of the lyrics, and they have to put the words in that we haven't provided. They could unscramble words at very low levels or play word games. They can fill gaps, write complete sentences. They can describe a picture with some or no words provided. They can answer questions in writing. They can write a new ending for a story, and they can write any text from a model, whether it's an invitation, an email, a description, a comparison. We're going to see lots of examples of these. One thing that's kind of fun is writing can even be a game. And here is a writing from a unit from level 3 of our world. And the unit is on animal habitats. And here we have Munira, who's done a fun thing. What she has done is she has shown 3 pictures of different kinds of animals, but she has written only about one of them, and she wants us to guess what it is. So my name is Munira. I live by the Nile. This animal lives here. What is it? Can you guess? It lives in the river. It's brown, and it has black spots on its back. It has 4 short legs and a long tail. It has big eyes on top of its head, and it uses them to see above the water. It has a strong mouth and sharp teeth. It can walk and it can swim. It is scary, but I like it. And obviously, it's an alligator. It's not a rhino, and it's not a turtle. But notice that this is a model. Before we ever ask our children to write something, they need to have a model. And here in this case, they're going to look at what Munira did. What are the words that told us what the animal looked like, and then to write the name. So they will then do the same thing, and they'll be able to actually say, my name is, and that I live by wherever they live. This animal lives here, and so forth. And then the description. So whatever animal they're choosing to write about, and they can do this again in groups. There's no reason at all that this needs to be done by an individual. If they're doing it at home, there has to be a way for them to be able to communicate with each other so that they can actually write together. Or if during class, if you can divide the class into small groups so that they can work on this. So there are lots of activities that we can use to connect reading and writing. Children can make drawings based on a reading, but also they can do a lot of other things. They can make posters that relate to the story or to an informational text or a collage. They can label visuals or photos related to a text. They can write the names of characters from stories or even create cartoons with bubbles where they use a few words that character has said. They can fill in graphic organizers with information from the story or text. And we want to make sure that we don't just ask them to use words, but that we use a lot of visuals as well. We live in a multimedia age, and we want to encourage our children to be creative. So let's talk a little bit about how do we connect reading and writing with stories that are read aloud. We might do that, depending upon what the story is, we might ask them if you think they'll like the characters. We'll go through a picture gallery and look at the various characters and see what do they think, are they going to like them or not. And then afterwards, we might ask them to write a list of what they liked or didn't like about the characters. And they could use a T-chart, and I'll show you that in just a minute. And then they could choose their favorite character to write about, and maybe you'll provide sentence starters. So here is a T-chart. This could be something that you have on screen and perhaps on a whiteboard, and they can tell you what characters they liked, what features they liked about characters, what they didn't like about some of the characters. You might have to organize that by different characters and then give them a chance to actually write about one of the characters that they either like or they didn't like. Again, this could be done independently, or it could be done in groups or in pairs. Another way of connecting reading and writing with stories is before reading, you need to ask questions to find out what the young learners already know and to actually make sure that the most important words are on the board and that they have been understood what they mean. And afterwards, they can use those words to retell the story, or they can dictate the words and you or the students can write the sentences using the language experience approach. So let's try one of these. This story, A Big Lesson for Little Frog, is available online. It's read actually by Jill Corey O'Sullivan. And the only reason I did not include it is it takes about 10 minutes when it's read. So instead, I'm going to show you the text and we'll talk a little bit about it. But you really might want to actually have your learners listen to it, and they can also be reading it while she is telling the story. So here we have, I would want to pre-teach Little Frog. I'd want to know if they know what this is. Can they tell what it is? They know that it's on a branch or something on a tree. And in fact, you might have to teach them that that's a monkey. And how do monkeys move? Well, we're going to find out that they swing. Then we might go to the second frame in which there's a parrot. They might know that that's a bird. And you could say, oh, do we have those parrots? Because I think you do have them. And what do parrots do? Well, they fly from tree to tree. And again, we have Little Frog just listening, but we're going to find out that he's kind of sad that he can't do that. Then we go to Giraffe, and what do giraffes do? Well, they also use trees, but look, they're so tall and they have such a long neck that they're able to actually eat the leaves. And we're going to see that Little Frog is getting more and more sad. And then finally, Giraffe is going to talk to Little Frog and explain, I think, that maybe Little Frog is really he's special too. And let's find out about that. And so in the end, we're going to have this. So what we would want to do, you're going to find out, let's go back, that the monkey can swing from tree to tree and asks Little Frog, can you swing too? And Little Frog says, no, I can't swing through the trees. Same thing with the parrot. The parrot says, look at me, I can fly from tree to tree. Can you fly too? And Little Frog says, no, I can't fly. He keeps getting sadder. And then Giraffe reaches up with his long neck and eats leaves and high in the tree. And now Little Frog is sad. And Giraffe sees that and asks, why are you sad, Little Frog? Little Frog says, monkey can swim, parrot can fly, you can eat leaves high in the tree. I am sad because I can't do those things. But Giraffe says, but Little Frog, you can do things we can't do. Really? Says Little Frog. Of course, Giraffe says, can I hop? And Little Frog says, no, but I can. Giraffe says, can Parrot swim? No. Can I swim? No. But I can, says Little Frog. Can we catch bugs with our tongues? No, but I can, says Little Frog. And so now Little Frog is very different. Look at how spry. He's very happy. He says, there are many things, Monkey, Parrot, and you can't do, Giraffe. I'm very sorry for you. Please don't be sad. And Little Frog is happy now. He hops away to swim and to catch bugs. So at the end, we might just use these pictures and have them retell the story in simple language. You could provide sentence starters like Little Frog sees Monkey. And you could say, what does Little Monkey do? And so forth. And so they would actually use the pictures and retell the story. And so this is actually an example of what I want to talk about next, which is called the language experience approach. And it's by these two educators, Van Allen and Halverson. And here's what they say. It's based on the idea that what I can think about, I can talk about. What I can say, I can write. What I can write, I can read. And I can read what I can write and what other people can write for me to read. And this is especially useful with children or with even adults who have minimal literacy, where they can tell you things and you can then write what it is that they're telling you. And then together you could read it and they then can write it as well. So here's the basis of a language experience story. So let's go through the steps. So after a story or a shared experience, they first discuss the experience. So we've just gone through that story. We've talked about it. And now I'm going to ask them to retell the story, but I'm going to be the one that does the writing. They dictate and I'm going to write what they say on a whiteboard. And sometime I'm going to stop and read aloud what has been written, and then they're going to continue. And so when we've all said all that they want to write, the teacher and the students read what's written on the board together. And they decide then if they want to change anything. Do they want to say more times that Little Frog is sad or that Little Frog becomes very happy? They may want to make corrections. Maybe they got the name of something wrong. Maybe they didn't remember giraffe. But then the students said, copy the text from the board. And there are lots of things they can do afterwards. So then they can find letters or words from the story and see how long it takes them to do that. They can do picture matches. They can match pictures with words or sentence from the story. They can arrange the sentences in order, which we call sequencing or sentence strips. They can remove some words from the story and ask others to fill in the gap, or they can even create a new ending. Lots of possibilities, but they have the basis of the text that you have written, but they have dictated. So it's their text. It's just that you've been the scribe. So let's talk a little bit more about the things that we need to do before reading. You can ask students about the pictures. We just did that, a picture walk. You can point to and discuss titles, subtitles, graphics, and so forth. You can find out what learners know about a subject. And actually, we're going to look at an informational text and use a KWL to do that. You can pre-teach vocabulary and write them on the board so they can use the words later. They can predict what the text is going to be about, and we can set some questions to answer. So let's take a look at, here's what a KWL is. It's one of the many kinds of graphic organizers that are available online. There are hundreds of these and they're free. You could actually simply send them as an attachment in email so every child would have them. But you might want to, as a whole class activity, talk about what is it that they already know about the text, what is it they want to know, and what have they afterwards learned. And let's take a look at a text you could use for that. Here's one. It's about snow animals, and we're going to want to do a lot to pre-teach key vocabulary and to actually establish some background information so that they can actually follow the text. So there's a lot of things that we want to do in pre-reading. So one of the first things we might want to do is we might see, well, what do they see? Let's go back to that KWL. What do they know based on here? And so what can they see? Well, maybe they see that there are animals. And you might ask, is there anything interesting? What do you see? Are they different? Okay, they're different. Are they the same in any way? And have them talk about the fact that they're all white. And where do you think this is? What's the weather like here? And you might then teach them about the thermometer and that the temperature is about, it looks like about 32 degrees centigrade. It's very, very cold. And you might ask, what do you think this white stuff is all around? And so maybe they could tell you that it's snow. And remember, the title is Snow Animals. So one thing we know is all of these creatures, the fox, the hare, and the polar bear, all live in areas where there is snow and where they are able somehow to survive when it's very, very cold. And we're going to find out about that. We'll see what is it that enables them to be able to live in the snow. And so there are lots of things that you could also say. There's a weird but true here, that a fact that is kind of weird, at least I did not know this. Polar bears are black under their fur. So that's very interesting. You think that they're white, but you sort of see a little bit of black in the polar bear's neck. So let's take a look at this reading. Again, this is a fairly low-level reading from level 2. It's again from our world. The Arctic is a very cold and snowy place. Arctic animals don't have winter clothes. Some Arctic animals have thick fur. Their fur keeps them warm. It hides them in the snow. So we're learning something very interesting here, that fur keeps them warm, fur keeps them warm, but it also hides them. And then we have all three of these animals, and they're Arctic animals, and polar bears are big, strong animals, and the Arctic fox and Arctic hare are very different. They're small and fast animals. And the Arctic fox and the Arctic hare have white fur in the winter, but brown fur in the summer. So the very first set of things that we might do after pre-reading is actually now to make sure that they understood the story, they understood the text. And so, is the Arctic hot? False. Some Arctic animals have thick fur to keep them warm. That's true. And the Arctic fox has brown fur in the winter. Well, we know that isn't true. So here are some activities so that we can do after reading Snow Animals. There's another graphic organizer. In this case, they just check who lives in the Arctic. Well, we know all three of these live in the Arctic. Who is small and fast? Is the polar bear? No. But how about the fox and hare? Yes. Who is big and strong? The fox isn't, the hare isn't, but the polar bear is, and so forth. And then after they've done that, then they're going to do sentence completions, where most of the information is already provided for them, and even the text is provided. So we have the polar bear, Arctic fox, and Arctic hare live in the, where do they live? They live in the Arctic, and so forth. The polar bear is big, and we could go upstairs and see strong, and so forth. And then they have a chance to actually talk about the animals that live in the Arctic. Here's another reading, and we won't have time to read much of it, but it is a little higher level. It's level 3, and it's a wonderful story about orphaned baby elephants. There is a sanctuary, and it's called the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, that helps animals, especially elephants, who have lost their mothers. And so the caretakers find these elephants, the orphans, they bring them to the Wildlife Trust, or the sanctuary, and they actually raise these elephants. They feed them milk, they sleep with them, they go into the water and wash with them. They in fact become just like an elephant's mother, and they protect the elephant. And over time, the elephants grow and they become more able to be alone. They play with others, they make friends. They become happy when they were terribly unhappy before they arrived. And eventually, some of them go back to the wild, because that's the goal, is for them to be able to go back. So it's a wonderful story, and it's a higher level. It's where here's what we can then do with that story. Again, true or false. And in some cases, there's kind of a trick. I'm not sure I like the first one, that it says the Wildlife Trust helps animals in Asia. Well, no, it's in Africa. But some of the others, the trust helps elephants and other animals. Sometimes a baby elephant's mother dies, people at the trust give milk to the baby elephants, and the elephants, now, do they never go back to the wild? No, that's not true. They do. But notice now they've gone through this once again to make sure that they understand the story, that they remember most of the things. They can actually go back and scan for that information. And then they have a chance now to put the sentences in order, which is a great activity. Very simple sentences that summarize the story. And so they're having a chance to actually basically write a summary, which they could then do after they put them in order. And then, of course, they get a chance to talk about the story. That third activity, where they put the sentences in order, is a great activity for almost any reading, to give them a chance first to go back and make sure that they remember these things. And then after they've gone back, now they know what order the information was presented in, and they can number the sentences and eventually write a summary. So lots of ways to do writing after reading. They can draw and label if they're beginners. They can fill in visuals, or even those poems that we saw, those shape poems could be something that they actually wrote based on something that they've read. They can put sentences or words or even visuals in order, just like we just did with that last reading. They can fill in blanks, answer questions from the text, and true, false, or it could be WH questions. They can describe a character, an animal, a place. They could write a new ending, or they could write a response journal, which is probably only for children at about levels 5 and 6, where they keep notes about the things that they have been reading and indicate whether they like them. So here's a good example of writing after reading. And we talked about the importance of having a model before that we ask our children to write something. Well, here is a chance for reading and writing to be very intimately related. Here we have Hiro, who's written about one of the festivals in his country, in Japan. It's the Sapporo Snow Festival. And notice the title. And in this case, the children are supposed to look at the title and notice that it's short and simple. And then as they look through what he has written, to find the words that describe what he saw, heard, and did. So they can actually underline those, they could circle those. The idea is those are the things that they're going to have to be able to do when they describe their own celebration or festival. And you notice at the bottom of the page that we have a graphic organizer that the students will use to fill in when they're working in a small group and listening to somebody else's story about a festival. However, they could also use that as a way of taking notes and thinking about what they want to include when they're writing about that festival. They could have one that says what people saw, what people did, and what you wore. We didn't have that as needed to be presented because that's a lot of information, but they could actually write about all three of those. And so here's another chance. There's a model, they look at it closely, they analyze it, and then they use that same model when they write. But besides helping them to write with using graphic organizers, we also want them to learn to read strategically. And they need to learn the difference between reading for main ideas, that's skimming, when reading for details, that's scanning, like a name or a date, a place, a time, reading to answer questions, reading to become acquainted with a topic or a set of words. What we really have to help, and this is very hard, is to help them not to read every word. Because what happens, especially as they get more proficient, is by the time they get to the end of a sentence, they've forgotten what the beginning of the sentence was because they were so focused on making sure they understood every word. So we want them to become comfortable with skimming for the major points, just like those 5 sentences that they put in order on that last text. We want them to be able to scan and not have to read everything, just scan for what it is they need to know, and reading just to answer the questions and so forth. So here is one of the ways that I do this. Ask them to read with their pencil. As they're reading, underline anything which is an important detail. Then they can circle unknown words, not spend time on them because we're going to go back and go over those words and they're going to have a chance to read again. They can put a question mark when they have a question about something that's in the text, but you could also make this more complex as your readers as they become more proficient and are older. They could put a check mark or a smiley face next to something that they already knew, and that would be just like that K and that KWL. They could use an exclamation point when something was very surprising and they want to actually talk about it or think about it. So again, you can start with a very simple way of getting them to read strategically, and you can give them more and more ways of doing that. So choosing texts for young learners, we want to make sure we have a variety of them. We've seen poems and stories and greeting cards, graphs, whatever is appropriate for their age, their language level, and also that is relevant and meaningful to them. It needs, as possible, to have interesting visuals, to engage on topics that connect with children's lives, and that lead to interesting activities like role plays or guessing games or projects or writing. Please remember to include as much as possible visual literacy. It's been estimated that 90% of the information we get is through visuals. So we want to make sure that the things that we choose to use with our young learners have lots of illustrations or photos or images, that they have charts or graphs or timelines, schedules, calendars, maps, signs, symbols, and graphic organizers. I'm going to show you some of those right now. But before that, I want to go over with you the ways in which we can be assured that visuals are very important to help us to interpret and remember a text. But you could do this with your learners. I'm going to do this with you. I'm going to show you a text for a brief time, and then I'm going to show you the text with visuals and ask you, which do you think you will remember, and why do you think you'll remember it? So here is the text from, it's a text about Chinese acrobats. It starts out by talking about that they were popular in Egypt and China, but today their Chinese circuses are more popular, more colorful, and more exciting than ever. And then talking about the Chinese acrobats who join the circus when they're very young. And then here are the kinds of acts they do. They juggle, and even with their feet, they cycle. They can use motorcycles or bicycles with one wheel. They walk tight wire, and they could even actually cycle or jump on a wire that's high in the air. I can't imagine this. They climb poles and jump from one pole to another and balance on the poles, and they actually spin plates. And the acrobat dances, jumps, or stands on one arm. So don't miss the Chinese acrobats. So here's the text. But now, what if you've been asked to read this text? You think you'd remember it more? We have this incredible picture in the lower left-hand corner of one of these Chinese acrobats doing something that I think most of us would never be able to do. And we have that whole group of them that are on one bicycle that seem to be riding around a circus. And we even have a weird but true fact that some Chinese acrobats called gastriloquists make the sound of birds, animals, crying babies, or machines when they do their acts. So notice how valuable the visuals are. I can't imagine that I will ever forget all these people that are on this bicycle, or this one woman who is basically able to do something that most of us would never be able to even try. And so it makes a great deal of impact. And I remember more than the kinds of things that those acrobats did. So graphic organizers, we've been talking about a lot of those. I've been showing you examples, but just they're a type of visual literacy that can be used to take notes from readings or discussion, take notes to prepare for writing. Ideally, they actually help you to organize your writing. They'll help our young learners to, because they get to see things and they can move them around in the graphic organizer. So here's a nice example from a child. This is a turtle tree map. And remember, we had a turtle. In this case, they can talk about what are turtles. Well, the descriptions, they're green and brown. What can they do? Well, they can swim, lay eggs, and move slowly. and they have a shell, a tail, and 4 legs. And notice, do not be terribly concerned when they're filling out these forms that maybe there's no S on the legs. Some of that is going to be something that you can help them with as they get more proficient. But this is you can tell this is a beginning writer who's able to simply probably copy keywords from a reading. And actually, then probably the next thing to do would be for them to actually talk about that turtle, actually write some sentences. It could be something that you could use with our story about all the animals that little frog meets. So for example, we could have this be a parrot, or it could be a giraffe, or it could be a monkey, or it could be the little frog. And in fact, you might have groups of children doing one animal and then doing what we call a jigsaw, where all the ones deal with that. We have them sign up, or a number of groups 1, 2, 3, 4. Then all the ones describe monkeys, all the 2s describe parrots, and so forth. And then they go back to their first group, and the 1s tell the 2s, 3s, and 4s what they have learned. The 2s tell the 1s, 3s, and 4s what they have learned. And so, and again, they can retell the story about the things that are most important about each of those animals. Here is an example of the use of a Venn diagram. And this is a story about, it's an informational text about paper art that is practiced in China and Mexico. But I want this to call your attention to this. This is a Venn diagram that children can use, that all of us can use, to identify the things from a reading that the 2 places, or in this case, the people in China and the people in Mexico share. They both make paper art. They both make animals and flowers. But in Mexico, people draw the picture, they punch out the paper, they hang the paper art in their houses. But in China, people fold the paper, use scissors, put the paper art on windows. So you could do a number of things, but they could then take this and say, people in China and Mexico both make paper art. They make animals and flowers. And then the next paragraph would be in Mexico. And so they've got already the information that they need to be able to actually read and talk about and write about paper art in 2 different countries. So it's a great way to organize and to make sure that they get the most important information. Here's another graphic organizer. In this case, I'm not going to go over this with you, but it's a very interesting story about the history of telephones, all the way back from what was called a candlestick phone to a rotary, a push button, a portable, a clamshell, and then of course to a smartphone. And here I want to call your attention to the right-hand side, to the timeline, where they actually then use those words like big buttons or a large touch screen and make it match it with whatever the type of phone that was. And so they, again, it's a way of taking the most important information and putting it into a graphic, which in this case helps them to see how the phone has developed. So this is a nice timeline that they can use to go back and make sure that they really understand. And this, by the way, it's a level 4 reading, and it looks a lot harder than it is, but because it has lots of visuals, because it has a timeline or a graphic organizer, it makes it a whole lot easier for them to do and to remember. And here's another one. In this case, it's the story of chocolate. And this is a much higher level. It's about Mayas, Aztecs, Olmecs, and the Spanish, and how, in fact, the Olmec and Mayan people first created chocolate, and then how it was changed by the Aztecs. So the Aztecs, and we won't read the text, but they added another ingredient. Notice the cause why. Well, the effect was that they didn't like it. They thought it was just didn't have enough flavor, so they added spices to it. They also did something so they could enjoy chocolate in their next life. So they actually buried some of the people with chocolate, so they would still have it. And the Spanish did not like the taste of the spice, and so they added sugar, and as a result, They found it was much better if it was mixed with sugar. And then they liked it so much that they took the recipe back to their own country so they could enjoy it in their own country. So here's a chart, which is a cause and effect chart that they can go through the text. It's an informational text about the development of chocolate and how it has changed over time, and get the key ideas, which they then can write in the next text that they can in activity 3. The Olmecs and Mayas used it first, then the Aztecs used it. Finally, the Spanish began to use chocolate. And then we talk about the difference in the ingredients. And then actually there's also some discussion about using chocolate as currency. And for example, the Aztecs used chocolate as currency, and by 1500, people were paying 30 seeds for a rabbit. That's how valuable chocolate is. If you're like us, or you're like me, my family, we understand. We think chocolate is that important. We love it. All right, and you can ask them, your learners, to keep a reading log. It can be very simple. And I've got book title for older young learners, but maybe you would want to just say the title without book title. And they have a chance to use an emoji to say if it's great or okay or not so good, and how many pages they wrote and anything else. So they get a chance to keep track of their own reading and to see that over time, they're probably going to be able to read more and say more about it. So reading happens all the time. It doesn't always have to be the focus. Games like concentration involve reading, where you have to turn the cards over and actually match them. Songs with closed captions encourage reading while listening or singing. Visuals for projects require interpretation and often a text. Picture captions, titles, directions all involve reading. And of course, they also involve writing. So writing can also be, we can also be including writing in a number of different ways. They can take keywords from reading and create sentences. We've done that. They can answer questions, or they can record what their partners say using a graphic organizer. They can create projects and label or write sentences or paragraphs about them. They can write poems, emails, other texts that can be created from themes or pictures. And they can write all sorts of different kinds of texts, especially in the early years, they're only going to be writing descriptions or narrations about something that happened. But as they get more, as they grow in their proficiency and also in their cognition, they're going to be able to explain things, compare things, and actually become more comfortable in their writing. So here's a long list of the kinds of texts that you can ask your young learners to write. And I won't go through all of them, but the alphabet book is a fun one, especially when you've got kids that are home. You could ask them to just, if you're talking about the rooms in a house, you could ask them in their own room, what do they have? Can they find something that begins with an A and something that begins with a B? How many can they find of those? It could be kind of a competition. They can create brochures. We've talked about greeting cards, obviously all sorts of digital texts, emails, blogs. They can even have e-pals, invitations, lists. We didn't do menus. A lot of these, we just don't have time. We did name cards. They can do a script, poems, posters, and a variety of things. Obviously stories. They can even write thank you notes. And I want to end with this. I think Hetty, a 9-year-old English learner cited in McGuire and Graves, says, the more you write, the more you learn to write. It's like speaking. The more you speak, the more you learn how to speak. So we really need to make sure that we are giving our learners not just time to speak, but also a lot of time to write. And I want to thank you. And you'll see here, here is thank you in body spelling. And note, I've given you my email address. It's crandall@unbc.edu. And I would especially love to hear from you about any time you've tried some of these activities with your young learners, but also if you'd like to discuss some of the things that I just talked about in this presentation, I would be very happy to hear from you and also to respond. And I want to thank you very much. And I wish I could be there with you. I would much prefer to have been there in person, but I'm glad at least that I was able to share a little bit of time with you. Thanks.